I said, oh, shall we then go to a restaurant or something before we go home? He said, no, I want to see Sean before he goes to sleep. I said, well, he's probably asleep by now, I was thinking, but okay, he wanted to see Sean, so he wants. So, but you know, even if we went to the restaurant, doesn't mean anything. It didn't, you know, make us avoid anything horrible. And the car stopped, and we got out of the car. It was really terrible.
I was a patrolman in a radio car, and I got a call that there was shots fired at 1 West 72nd Street. There was a man pointing into the vestibule, and he said, that's the man doing the shooting. And at that point, we realized this is for real. So I peeked in and saw a man with his hands up. So I threw this guy up against the wall. And at that point, Jose says to me, he shot John Lennon. And I said, you what? I took a turn around to see what was happening behind me, and I saw two of my fellow police officers carrying a man out face up with blood coming out of his mouth. At that point, I looked and I recognized John Lennon.
Dva policijska automobila odjurila su u bolnicu Roosevelt. U jednom su prevozili Johna, a u drugom je bila Yoko. U hitnoj službi spreman je bio doktor Steven Lin.
I actually got here before the patient. I didn't know exactly what was happening. Everybody in the emergency department was ready. Through the doors just like these, two police officers came in. We didn't have locks in that period of life, but we do today. They were carrying a body over their shoulder. It was lifeless. We were ready.
It was a very busy night. There were other people who came in, swaggering in with varied and sundry problems. There was a waiting room full of people. And there was a gentleman who had come in about an hour before Lennon was brought in, who was in a motorcycle accident, and it turned out that he was a cub reporter.
The doctor comes over, and she looks at me, and I'm just filthy with everything. And she said, all right, we're going to take you into X-ray and see what the damage is. I said, all right. And at that moment, the door behind me slams open, and a man comes running in yelling, we've got a gunshot in the chest. And the doctor says, when's it coming in? He said, it's hitting the door right now. So she says, Alan, I'm sorry, I got to take care of this. No problem, I understand. And I can hear footsteps again when the door opens up, and I look behind me, and in comes a stretcher. 4, 5, 6, I'm not quite sure how many police officers are carrying a stretcher.
We positioned the body on a stretcher in front of us. It was clear that there were 3 gunshot wounds in the left upper chest and 1 to the left arm. It was also clear that there was no circulation, no perfusion. We initially didn't know that it was John Lennon. As part of our normal routine, we took his identification out of his clothing, and it said John Lennon, but the nurses said, this doesn't look like John Lennon, it can't be. Almost immediately thereafter, Yoko Ono entered the emergency department. We knew who we were dealing with. We had a very important person in our midst, and it was our job to attempt to resuscitate him.
2 officers come out, and they're literally standing over my bed. And one says to the other, can you believe it? John Lennon. I open my eyes and I look up and say, excuse me, sir, what did you say? And he said, I didn't say anything. And he moves away. Well, did he say John Lennon? Did he say Jack Lemmon? Did he say some other name of somebody that, you know, we don't know? And I hear crying. And again, I crane around, I look behind me, and in comes walking an Asian woman in a full-length mink coat. I knew it was Yoko Ono, so it had to be John Lennon.
Alan Weiss je uspio doći do govornice i nazvati svoju redakciju, te javiti da je netko pucao u Johna Lennona, da je on u bolnici, te da njegovo stanje nije poznato. Britanski novinar slobodnjak Tom Brooke živi u Njujorku.
On that day, I was at home. I lived down in Greenwich Village, and I got a call from Jonathan King, and he told me he just heard a news report that there'd been a shooting at the Dakota apartment building and that possibly John Lennon was involved. Well, when I heard that, I thought this could be a really, really big story. So I left home very rapidly with my tape recorder and a radio, got in a cab, came up 8th Avenue, and I arrived here probably around 11:15.
My girlfriend came in ashen-faced, looked at me and said, "John's been shot." And I mean, I couldn't, you know, I was stunned. I just couldn't. I said, I just saw him. She said he was shot at the Dakota. He's up at Roosevelt Hospital. So I ran downstairs with her, and we got a cab and headed up 8th Avenue to Roosevelt Hospital.
Kamermana lokalnih vijesti snimio je trenutak kad je stigao producent Jack Douglas.
Jack Douglas, I was just with it. But you have to read the word.
Yeah. Is Yoko here? Is Fred here?
She's here. Yoko is here.
Okay.
So I had a special number to call the Dakota desk, you know, the place where they admit people, the security gate. And I called that number. And I said, "Hi, it's Elliot, and I just want to make sure everything is okay." And the person hung up the telephone. And that had never happened before. So I made a quick telephone call to American Airlines to book one seat on the last flight from LA to New York.
And I am sitting on the gurney, and I'm able to look into the room and watch them work on John. And he's lying there on a bed, and he's surrounded by medical staff, and all his clothes are off. And I just remember there being a lot of blood.
What we found was that all of the blood vessels that left the heart, the aorta and all of its branches, had been destroyed. We tried to find a place where we could stop the bleeding. I literally held John Lennon's heart in my hand and I massaged it to try to get his heart going again. We transfused blood, but it was clear with all of the vessels destroyed, there would be absolutely nothing that we could do that evening. About 11:10 to 11:15 that evening, we pronounced John Lennon dead. I think every one of us in the room that evening suddenly realized what we were doing, where we were, and who we were dealing with. A lot of people began to cry. We reminded the staff to be certain not to say anything to anybody until appropriate press announcement had been made. We told the staff that they couldn't sell their uniforms that might be bloodstained. We made certain that all the linens and all the equipment in the room was secured and that the medical record was tightly secured.
And then suddenly, out of virtually every door to the emergency room, security officers came running in, and they said, "You, lay down." I said, "No, I'm quite happy here." He says, "Lay down." Because apparently the ABC story had been reported by that point. So I laid down, they took the gurney, and they took me out of the emergency room, and they put me in another room right outside the emergency room.
It was at that point that I understood I needed to walk down the hallway and speak to Yoko Ono. As I did, I remembered that I was taking care of Alan Weiss, an ABC news director, and he had been laying on a stretcher right outside of the resuscitation room, but the stretcher was empty.
The hospital plays Muzak, and the song that comes up on the Muzak is All My Loving. The song ends a minute, 2 minutes later, there's a shriek. No, no, oh no, oh no.
Her first response was immediate. It's not true, you're lying, it can't be, I don't believe you. In my mind, it literally felt like this was going on for about 5 minutes. She was laying on the floor, she was hitting her head against the floor. I put my hands behind her head to try to prevent damage to her. Yoko Ono was incredibly emotional for quite some time. And in fact, it was when one of the nurses brought in John Lennon's wedding ring and gave it to me and I gave it to her when she accepted the fact that her husband was in fact dead. And I was touched by the first thing that she said, because what she said was, "My son Sean is still awake. He's probably sitting in front of the TV set. Please delay making the announcement 20 to 25 minutes so I can get home and make certain that I tell him what happened before he sees it on TV."
The doctor who first saw me comes in and says, "All right, Alan, let's continue with you." I go, "Hold on, Doc. What's the story with John? Is he alive? Is he dead? Is he paralyzed? I mean, I saw it looked like a lot of blood, and she said, I can't tell you anything. There's going to be a press conference in 40 minutes. And I said, let me ask you a question. I said, you're one of the main doctors there, right? She said, yes. I said, if someone was brought in with a gunshot, it's only been 15, 20 minutes. If the person were alive, wouldn't you still be needed? She said, that's an accurate assumption. I said, okay. I said, I gotta get to a telephone.
Late this evening, one of the world's great entertainers and musicians, John Lennon of the Beatles, was shot outside his New York home. So we begin tonight by bringing you up to date on that story. John Lennon was shot 3 times at around 11 p.m. Eastern Time. He was rushed to New York's Roosevelt Hospital, but died a few minutes later. Police have a suspect in custody whom they describe only as a local screwball.
Monday night, I was actually printing the pictures that I'd taken on Saturday. Late as usual, I was trying to get everything done. Then a friend called up and said that he saw on TV that John Lennon was dead. Kind of sunk down to the floor and was just thinking, how can you change this? How can you fix it? How can you make it better? What can you do to reverse that? And there's nothing you can do.
I would say about 15 minutes after I got here, I heard that Lennon had been taken to Roosevelt Hospital and that he was pronounced dead. And that was really earth-shattering news, and it was my job to report and relay that news back to the BBC in London, which I set about doing by using a phone in a phone box just at the end of 72nd Street.
U Britaniji je rano ujutro.
On the line now from New York, from outside the apartment building where the murder took place, is our reporter Tom Brooke. Tom, can you tell us exactly what happened?
Well, as you were saying, Brian, John Lennon was killed 2 hours ago. He was returning home with his wife, Yoko Ono.
Johnovu bivšu djevojku iz srednjoškolskih dana Telmu probudio je telefonski poziv.
It was my news editor. I was a journalist on the news desk at Granada Television saying, John Lennon's been shot. He's dead. And I just kept saying, are you sure? How? I don't believe it. And he said, we need you in here quickly. So I drove in the early hours of the morning. I passed Mendip's, the house where we used to go, and I looked at it. It was dark. It didn't look any different. And I still expected that when I got to Granada, it would all have been some misunderstanding.
Radijski novinar Dave Sholin stiže kući u San Francisco, presretan zbog intervjua koji je napravio prije 7 sati. Nije čuo vijesti dok nije uključio radio u automobilu.
I literally pulled over, I stopped the car, and for a split second, even though I knew it was happening, I was kind of like praying to myself, maybe this is a bad dream.
Dok putuje u New York, njegov prijatelj Elliot Mintz još ne zna da je John umro.
A flight attendant come out of the cockpit in tears. And I looked at her and I said, are you okay? And she looked at me and she said, they just killed John Lennon.
Londonski aerodrom Heathrow, 6 sati ujutro. Novinar BBC-a Andy Peebles i njegov producent Paul Williams upravo su se vratili iz New Yorka i ne znaju za tragediju.
Paul dropped his phone, those ones with the bendy leads, and it hit the floor, wherever we were in Heathrow, the terminal, and bounced, and I turned to him and he had tears streaming down his face. And I said, what's the matter? Thinking something had gone wrong with the family. And he said, it's John. And I said, what do you mean it's John? He said, John Lennon, he's been shot. And I said, Paul, don't be ridiculous. He's been shot. He said, yeah, he's dead. I just stood there, aghast.
I was shocked, and then I'm saying to myself, who did this? And then all of a sudden they said, we're getting some information saying that the man that killed him may have come all the way from Hawaii. And when they said that, I immediately realized who it was. And you can't imagine the disgust and anger. Then it struck me that I might have a picture of him getting that album signed. So I called the New York City police. I said, I think I got a picture of the killer with him at 5 o'clock. And they hung up on me. So I called the Daily News. he said to me, you think you have what? And he said, Paul, are you sure that this is the man that you believe killed him? And I said, well, that's the man named Mark from Hawaii who was waiting out there all day with the album who got the autograph. And he said, are you sure? I said, yeah. He says, because you realize we're going to put this picture on the cover of our newspaper. And if we're not right, you know, there's big problems. I said, no. I said, I don't know if that's the killer. That's the man you're asking me about that was outside there all day. So he said, all right. So what they did is they had a connection with the police station, and they had a reporter there that was trying to see what the guy looked like to see if it matched the photo. But they kept him under a coat. They put him under his overcoat and stuff, you know. But what happened was time was running out. The editor said, we got to get this on the cover of the paper. And he said, you got to find something for me. Look at his shoes. Look at anything. See if you can find, is he wearing glasses? The guy said, they have him under an overcoat. I can't see the guy. And then the guy said, wait a minute. I see a scarf hanging below the coat. And the editor said, go to press. Because he was wearing the scarf in the picture. It's just mind-boggling. It's so senseless and it's a waste, but it achieved what that piece of garbage wanted to achieve, was make a name for himself. You know, by doing that, he linked himself with John forever. And unfortunately, you know, that's the way history is.
It affects me emotionally. Yeah, it does, because I just feel we've all been deprived. And you want to know what he would have done.
Johnova prijateljica iz Liverpoola, Cilla Black, tog kobnog dana pjevala je i Međan u Bahreinu.
I did go a little bit on my good nights. Yeah, that was... emotional.
Never take a day for granted. I will tell you that, because on a dime, life can change.
So all those people that loved John felt that they knew him. I knew him. But I'm not that far from people who thought they knew him, because he was his music for the most part. You know, 80% of him was what he gave you of himself. So these people who thought they knew him, well, they did.
Love is real.
Well, yeah, my son Lennon called him after John Lennon, man, without a doubt. And I know he probably gets stick for it, but it is a tribute, you know what I mean? But yeah, why not? Like I said, man, I love Lennon, you know what I mean?
I think that influencing the way people think or thought was in its way as potent a force in his life as the music and the words.
Yoko se morala nositi s valom tuge koji je preplavio milijune diljem svijeta.
A lot of people were standing outside, you know. But I was more concerned about what I'm going through and what Sean is going through. But then when I heard that, you know, some girls jumped off the roof or something, and then I thought, oh dear, I have to take care of them. Because, you know, I am his wife.
8 dana nakon Johnove smrti, Paul Goreš primio je paket iz Dakote. U njemu je bila knjiga koju je ostavio Johnu na potpis.
I opened the book and he wrote Love John Lennon 1980. And it was the only time he ever wrote love on something for me. John had signed it 3:30 on December 8th.
Na prijedlog Yoko Ono organizirano je bdijenje širom svijeta s punih 10 minuta šutnje. Stotine tisuća ljudi okupljene u Central Parku preplavile su se u ulicu ispred zgrade Dakota.
At the time, the whole world all stood together and created a ring around the globe. And I think that that memory, even if the memory is not, you know, has faded or whatever, it's there. And we are together.
Love is real.
John Lennon's heart looked just like everybody else's heart. Unfortunately, at the moment that I found it, it was empty and devoid of blood and lifeless and not beating, but it was a good heart.